Good evening, everyone. I would like to declare the meeting open and welcome all in attendance. The Audit and Risk Committee meeting is being live streamed and recorded in accordance with the City's Live Streaming and Recording Council meetings policy. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the City recording and live streaming their image and/or voice. I'd now like to pass over to Deputy Mayor Barry Winmar to present the Welcome to Country. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll begin by acknowledging my elders past and present. Ngalat nyening kuro ngalanois neja nonga boja. Nonga motjerpa neji nana kwabarak nonga boja kurolong. From the beginning of time to the end, this is Noongar country. Noongar people have been graceful keepers of our nation for many, many years. Getting encouraging Jerpa neja word nonga boja ngala mama border. Look, listen, understand, and embrace all the elements of Noongar country that is forever our home. Kai wan jungan ko Jerpa neja nonga boja dajli wangani nonga boja. Hello and welcome. I'm just happy as we gathered on country and meeting here on Noongar country this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here, and before commencing the proceedings, I too would like to acknowledge that we come together tonight on the traditional land of the Noongar people, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. Moving on to item 3, do we have any apologies? From the CEO, if we could record that in the minutes, thank you. There have been no leave of absence previously approved. Item 4, public question time, nil. Receiving of petitions, presentation and deputations, nil. Presentations, nil. Deputations. Declarations of interest, financial proximity, impartiality, both real and perceived by members and city officers. Nil. Thank you. Moving to the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 2nd of December, we have a recommendation before us that these minutes be confirmed as a true and correct record of the meeting. Do I have someone to move? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Seconder? Thank you, Councillor. Is there any discussion on those minutes? If not, all those in favour? And nil against. Thank you. Moving to item 8, the Audit Action Log Progress Report. We're being asked to note the status of the outstanding audit actions as outlined in attachment A. Would management care to introduce this topic? Thank you, Russell.
Through the Chair, we haven't had any audits completed since the December meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee meeting. The OAG have started our audit on gift declarations. We were one of 5 local governments selected to participate in that audit. In January, they did attend our offices for a week to gather the documentation and meet relevant staff. They've gone away. They're now doing a forensic analysis on key staff's emails to look at whether gifts have been disclosed in accordance with the requirements under the Act. Overall, so no actions list added to the log since the last meeting. Several actions have been marked complete. Overall, most actions are tracking well. A small number have had to be revised in terms of the completion date, but nothing substantial.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'd like to open it now to questions. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Through the Chair, item 8.1, if you go to page 11, please, with the ongoing actions, when you look at the second heading where it says Aquatics Centre Safety Review, under process improvements, could you just provide some clarity as to why there's multiple lines with dates, with complete and ongoing, but without any audit or action on the left-hand side?
Through the Chair, unfortunately, when Australian auditors completed the report, they made a number of recommendations under the one heading without separating them out. So unfortunately, it's not particularly easy to digest within the report. I've made the best effort I can. Certainly in future, when we engage auditors, we'll be asking that each individual recommendation receive its own specific section of the report to make it easier. It just makes it difficult to track at this level. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was unfortunate it was presented in that way.
Thank you, through the chair. I actually have 4 or 5 questions on this point. Just before I continue on, just when you introduced this, you were talking about the gifts and donations that City of Kwinana was one of 5 chosen. As we were chosen, is that a cost to the city to participate in this?
Through the chair, no cost to the city. So that will be met by the Office of the Auditor General, and they're also meeting their costs of KPMG to do the forensic side of things, thankfully.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, on page 12, which one am I looking at? The integrity education, just where it says not identified under the risk rating and the approved completion date, but it says ongoing. I was just wondering if there's some clarity around that, please.
If I'm looking at the right section, it's because at the time of the completion of the report, there hadn't been a rating identified within it. So rather than me try and speculate and transpose what I thought it might have been, I've just marked not identified to indicate within the report there was no stated rating for that, which is unfortunate. Ideally, we would like that rating, and it's something we will make sure we need in the future when we finalise reports. But sometimes when we require reports on an urgent basis to get to this next meeting, sometimes we put up with some things that we wouldn't otherwise accept. But yeah, the short answer is it wasn't identified within the report, so this is trying to reflect that.
And then on page 14, sorry, I'm going via the pages of the agenda, if that's just to be clarify. Is there any form of interim procedure to implement to rectify this, looking at what the manager of the human resources has said about how the system is still yet to be reconfigured and you're having to manually track this? Is there any interim policy until the computer system comes online to give this reporting of a particular risk, that making sure that incidents are addressed within a timely manner, and I guess the manual side of it? I'm just conscious that this is ongoing. Has the city looked at any other, I guess, version of something, even if it's not our final solution, but an interim solution that you could potentially address this in a more timely manner, being it's the safety of our staff community?
Good question. I am going to break it down into several sections. One of the things that was identified was the workflow in the system and the timeliness of the workflow. So we are working on that. In the interim, we have our safety officer is ringing and following up on a weekly basis to see where the incidents are. So if the incidents have been reported, whether they've been reviewed by the manager, that then gets escalated to the director before it gets signed off. So he's tracking that manually, and that is being reviewed at the Work Health and Safety Committee meeting. So that is the workflow will be, part of that is working with the IT team to be able to get the hierarchy in place, and that is being worked on by both the IT team and the safety person. We've got a cadet who's working on that, so that should be implemented soon. But in the meantime, we have a process. It was also identified that there was a request for specific graphs, and one request was the lost time injury graph. We have established that that cannot be configured with the payroll system, and so we are looking at a workaround for that. And we've been to another local government who has a different payroll system, and that they have MyOsh as well, and it cannot be configured to that. So they have a workaround, so it has to be a manual thing, and we're developing that in terms with our payroll being able to get the number of hours and so forth, and get the information from LGIS to help benchmark that. So there are workarounds. We're just the system will be fixed in one area. We will have to have a permanent workaround via the payroll system for the lost time injury recording.
Thank you, Chair. On page, sorry, my iPad timed out. On page 44 and 46 of this item in the agenda, both of them don't have anything regarding the status. So there is the initial management comment. Is that something that you're able to speak to today? On page 44, it's the Marcy Partners Financial Management Review with payroll.
Through the chair, that appears to be an error. We can certainly provide a status update now.
Just through the chair, that it says Marcy Partners, but that is in relation to the OAG audit, which was closed out in December. So there was an agreement or a management comment provided as part of that. So the management comment under action is the updated comment from that meeting. The process from this point is to appoint, and as part of our normal internal audit, is to appoint the auditor to do that audit of the process.
Sorry, and just to clarify, that would mean, so your approved completion date of the 30th of June 2025 is to take that next step for this, is that correct?
Through the chair, the intent of that date is to have that audit done. It's not a very big audit. It is basically another set of eyes having a look at the process that's being put together. So we would anticipate, as long as we have our auditors, internal auditors back before June, that audit is done by then, so that we close that out by then.
Thank you, Ben.
I guess through the chair, just a sort of follow-up. In this action, it references we'll do this audit by 30th of June 2025, but the internal audit summary of audits on page 8 includes developer contributions on there, but it's not budgeted and it's not anticipated for completion prior to June. Can I just confirm when that's supposed to be scheduled?
Through the chair, just to be clear, they're different things. The contributed assets is related to our asset register. So we had issues with determining what date they became a city asset and which financial year to put them in, and because of trying to determine that date, and it's particularly tricky around a change of financial year, we ended up in a situation where we had to correct a prior year because we had decided, based on our previous agreement with the auditor about when we should recognise the ownership of an asset, we had to make a correction. The developer contribution scheme is unrelated, so that's more about our management of assets being created on behalf of groups of developers.
Thank you. So through the chair, just as a follow-up, so are we still committing that we're going to complete a development contributed asset audit by the end of 2025?
Through the chair. I've mentioned in previous meetings that the city was looking at doing shared services in the auditor area with the city of Coburn. I've been delayed, unfortunately, given some staffing changes, but just last week I had a meeting with my counterpart over at the city of Coburn, and so we've had some discussions around doing a preliminary audit of a particular agreed area on an initial basis to see whether that works for both parties and whether there's any cost savings as a result of that. So we're still in the early stages of that discussion. If that works, we'll look at seeing if we can develop a shared internal audit plan. So we would certainly look at including this as one of the areas we would be looking at. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, it's been delayed further than I would like, given their staff movements, but those discussions are now hopefully going to progress where we can achieve some positive outcome for us and for them.
So I think on that, if I may, the proposal to do this joint approach for internal audit has been on the table for some time, and I think this committee would have an appetite that a decision be made one way or the other in a timely manner, certainly no later than mid this year, in order to ensure that we don't, in fact, create a risk by simply trying to be potentially more efficient. It's an ambitious intention to work with another council. No criticism of the other council or ourselves. It's just takes time and can delay things. And in order to have a specific question answered, regardless of how we go about this, is it the intention to do the developer contribution assets audit this year? Would you like to take it on notice?
Yeah, I'll take that on notice, thanks.
Thank you. Perhaps you could come back to the next meeting on that with respect to the audit plan. Ben.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, similar to the chair's points, I think the securing a resource, I know there's been active in sort of involvement to secure that, whether it's an FTE or a shared resource. But I think the combination of not having a resource and an audit plan that is largely unbudgeted and quite small hours for the size of the city, I think it's something that requires a sense of urgency, particularly as we start to move into sort of financial reporting period. So, yeah, the areas review on page 8, the developed contributions is right at the bottom. It's not budgeted for as an example. However, typically internal audit plans are risk-based. They cover off the key controls. And we would expect to have a certain amount of level of rigour to cover off those key risks which are included within the risk register. So I think, you know, certainly resource is one component, but sufficient planning as well, just to make sure we're covering off all those sort of components. So I guess that's just a particular observation. The second sort of question through the chair is just in relation to the OAG performance audit around gifts and benefits. Appreciate the update both verbally and in the pack. The city does tend to get quite a few OAGs, Public Sector Commission type of audits. For this particular one, was there a basis for which Kwinana was one of the 5 selected? Was there an indication, was it in relation to the volume, the nature of gifts or hospitality, or was it self-volunteered to participate as part of this review?
Through the chair, no, I did pose that question during the meeting, and there was no particular action on our behalf that caused us to be included as part of that. So there's a number of metro local governments and then a certain number of regional local governments that they selected apparently at random.
Okay, thank you. I guess through the chair, I think if we get selected a number of audits, because we've participated in quite a few over the last few years, maybe getting the basis for or certainly asking the question around it, just to make sure it's fair in terms of Kwinana's internal effort associated with that, but to really understand the risk and why we're choosing that in the first place. So it's great that you asked the question in the first instance. One final question, just on page 11 it gives a summary of the audits, which is quite useful, provides the audits, risk rating, status. In the status, we've got both complete and closed as references. Is there a difference between what is complete versus what is closed?
Through the chair, just terminology difference, unfortunately, between various staff members that update this audit log at any particular time, but no difference.
Okay, no worries. Cool, thank you. No further questions.
I have one question. It's on page 11 of the agenda. And it relates to the date against the comment around CCTV surveillance and duress alarms in the creche and outside play area. So my question is, December 2027 is for all intents and purposes nearly 3 years away. Given the sensitivity of this area, is that an acceptable timeline for that specific part of addressing this audit? Or is that something that could be done ahead of time, even though there is a larger refurbishment planned?
Through the chair, the decision at this point, as far as I understand, hasn't been made as to whether or not we would put CCTV in that area. The creche is not an automatic area we'll start putting cameras into. So because we're going to go through a refurbishment of the building, we're going to have to do a whole lot of recabling of the building. It's a good opportunity to have a look at that question all in one go. So that date is being set based on that's when we expect the building to be complete. Not necessarily it'll take that long if we choose to do it, to actually implement it, but by then we expect that we're fully done.
So that makes good sense in bundling up the work. It's just given the sensitivity and the focus on these areas, I would encourage the city to think about bringing that forward if it is sensible, possible and economically appropriate, prior to waiting for any major works. It's really just a risk approach to a very sensitive area. I'll leave that with the city. Are there any further questions on this item? Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, through the chair. Just one final one, as it was brought up in discussion. On page 8, with my understanding, when you've got your audit review timetable that we're looking at, underneath it, it says areas outstanding from 2021 to 24 strategic internal audit plan. If we are working through now in 25 through these, and I know, as Ben said, things such as resourcing issues, is there a 2025 to 28 audit plan that we are behind because we're still trying to catch up on a 21 to 24 audit plan?
Through the chair, no, there isn't. And just to clarify where we're at in terms of the audit space, when I commenced with the city in 2019, we had an internal audit plan that was developed internally. So it's obviously subject to biases of the individual officers. This is for the first time we developed a plan through an external firm. They developed this plan based on the city's risk register. So this was based on key risks identified for the city at the time. Obviously, we're mildly behind in terms of this plan, but the risks to the city have also evolved within that time frame. My hope is that we can develop something sooner rather than later with COVID, but even if we can't, we do need to update and develop a new internal plan for probably an appropriate time frame might be the next 3 years, and base that frame around the key risks to the city as at this point in time.
If there are no further questions, we'll move to the officer's recommendation, where we're asked to note the status of the outstanding audit actions. Could I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor. All those in favour? Carried, nil against. Moving to item 8.2, the compliance audit return. Would management care to introduce this item before we move for questions?
Through the chair, this is the city's internally prepared proposed response to the Department of Local Government's annual questionnaire on key governance matters. To particular areas I'll draw your attention to of, I guess you would say, deficit, where we've given a no response. Firstly, in relation to a gift declaration, there was a gift that was accepted and it was declared initially within this legislative timeframe. So the Local Government Act says that gifts needed to be declared. So that is notifiable gifts above $50 from the same recipient within a financial year need to be declared within 10 days of acceptance. So the gift in this instance was a ticket. That ticket was declared by the person that accepted it within the 10-day timeframe. What's happened is on the day of the actual event, their partner has come from the airport, gone straight to the event as a last-minute sort of an action at the request of the host of that particular event. So the reason the city declared this as a no was because that additional ticket wasn't declared within the 10-day time frame. So although, as I said, the initial acceptance was, the subsequent ticket wasn't. We've now implemented a process where the executive assistant will automatically enter any gifts accepted within the system. We've also got in touch with Attain, which is our software that manages all gift declarations. So we've got in touch with them and they've actually agreed to amend the system in two key ways. So there's now an alert that's going to occur if a gift is accepted outside the 10-day time frame, so that the governance team automatically are advised instead of having to look in the system and search within all the gifts that are accepted. They've also put in intend on putting a comment section so that we can put additional information. So if a gift is accepted, circumstances change, we can actually input some information, because at the moment it's very procedural. You can't add any comments. So that's one key change that they're going to be making that hopefully addresses that issue in the future. The other no response given relates to a tender. So obviously we have a procurement policy. Procurements above a certain threshold require a formal procurement process to be undertaken. Procurements below that threshold can be undertaken by the officers without undergoing, say, a formal tender process. So in this particular instance, it's come to light that the handyman, it's technically handyman's type services for the city's retirement village. So when it's been calculated that the total of services engaged by them over a 3-year period exceeded the threshold for a procurement process. So when you looked at the individual engagements of this handyman, obviously on a case-by-case basis it was below the threshold, but when we added it up over the 3-year time frame, it turned out that we should have undergone a procurement process. So for that reason, that was marked as a no response.
Any questions on? Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you. Just when you have a situation like that, are we going to be able to identify potential, I guess, overspends in the future? Is there some way to flag that in the system, that how much money we're spending with a particular contractor on a particular site?
Through the chair, we do regularly, and that's why things like this are determined. So just to be clear, the officer was compliant with the purchasing policy. So each individual contract was a contract in its own right, and they complied with the purchasing policy. The Act talks about, or the regulations talk about, breaking up contracts deliberately to avoid the tender regulations. That's not what's occurred in this case. It's just genuine purchases under the purchasing policy. One of the reasons we like to identify these things is when you're spending that sort of money over a 3-year period, we also see that there's potential savings to be made and quality and safety improvements that can be achieved if we were to package it together into a bigger contract. So it's not just about the fact that over a period of time it has gone over the tender threshold, not that we necessarily are required to tender it, but it's also because we see the opportunity to get a better deal for the city.
I guess the question for me is, who has the authority to approve this ongoing work, and are they aware of the need to be cognizant of this requirement going forward? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is whether there is appropriate conflicts of interest declared, those sorts of things, when it's an ongoing arrangement.
Through the chair, the office is aware And what usually happens in this sort of situation is we test the market, we end up with an outcome, and then we repeat that outcome several times, and then we might test the market again and get the same outcome. And after a while, there's just a practice, because it's compliant with our procurement policy, just to call that same person, because you're recognising they know the job, they know where I am, it's quick and easy, we'll get it done. And often they're very small purchases. It might be $1,000 or $2,000, which is not a big amount within the procurement policy. So it's compliant. But that's why we have a separate independent part of our business, the procurement team, and they apply that oversight. They look for these sorts of things. So, and it's not just this particular team that has been captured with this oversight. My teams in the infrastructure directorate, we sometimes get picked up for the same thing, and then we look at that and go, yeah, good spotting. It's a good opportunity for us to now pull this into a bigger contract and get a better deal for the city.
Thank you. Further questions, Councillor?
Sorry, just backing on, thank you through the chair, that comment, has there ever been crossover between different directorates with a particular supplier as well, just thinking when you were saying about the two different ones?
Through the chair, as often as we can, we will package the whole lot up. So it's quite common across departments and directorates that we'll identify a purchasing need across the business and we'll package it up into a single procurement process. It doesn't always work, but certainly this team, the Retirement Village, and our facilities team at the Operations Centre, they do a lot of very similar purchasing. So there'll be opportunities to pull them into single contracts with a number of different procurements.
Thanks, Ben.
Through the chair, yeah, similar to Councillor Acker, I was interested in the ongoing monitoring that occurs. I think what you've described is that the ongoing monitoring, just to see how we're going in terms of sort of volume. Those are sort of reviewed, and then, like you say, the appropriate contracting strategy is implemented. Maybe a suggestion is, in terms of the actions, is to include that process as well. So I think the action talks to what you've done specifically for this exception, but it'd be useful just to reiterate the ongoing processes you have to review the spend. So when it gets close to a limit, then you identify that and work out the strategy.
Yeah, through the chair, the procurement team is very much on top of getting ahead of the game in that regard. So a single occurrence has been identified in this particular annual review. So this is an annual review. I think in previous years we may have one or two as well. So we do find them and they drop away. So you can see a single occurrence in this particular review, and that means they've looked at every single supplier in the system and identified all purchases over a 3-year period that exceed that number. And in this case, without a tender in place or a exempt purchasing process in place, and identified one. What tends to happen is it creeps up on us, and that's the other thing they're trying to get in front of. So it hasn't been identified previously because things were cheaper a couple of years ago. As prices have increased, it's just pushed us over the limit. So that's why this year it's triggered, but they are trying to get in front of that so we don't trigger it in future.
Thank you. Thank you for additional context. And yeah, appreciate one sample exception out of many isn't big in the scheme of things, but I guess it's just the opportunity for learning. And I think it sounds like in terms of those ongoing monitoring processes, especially over 3 years, it's monitoring on a fairly regular basis. Like it's not waiting until the end of the 3 years and going, "I know we've overspent." So yes, so I appreciate that. So yeah, appreciate the additional context. I had one question through the chair. The completion of this compliance audit return, was this completed within the city or was it a use of external consultant?
Through the chair, no. Well, to save costs, we do this internally.
Okay.
So my team does that, and we chase up the relevant teams.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up, in the previous audit log, we reference this as an audit activity. Typically, audit is independent and objective, so yeah, it's not a necessary review of the compliance audit return. It's more just a governance activity. So just confirming whether this is an audit or it's a typical BAU activity. I
know many local governments do have an external audit firm conduct this. we obviously elected to do this internally for cost-saving benefits to the city. I guess from a terminology point of view, you could call this a checklist or something along those lines. Audit's probably rather an excessive term for a review of this type. Yeah, I'll take your point on that regard.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think just in terms of the audit, it's, yeah, perhaps it's, like you say, there's a compliance or governance checklist, or certainly note it in the log just to make sure we differentiate between our normal governance activities and when we're getting someone in to double check what we're doing. I had just a couple of questions in terms of the return, and yeah, just noting that, like I said, there's only a couple of exceptions, and with those exceptions, we noted down those corrective activities, which is all part of the process, which is great. Just on page 58 of the return, I think it's page 7 of 14. Yes, just the top one, do we publish an update version of the electoral gift register? There's a section on your website that talks around the electoral gift process, but there's no link of a gift register on the website.
Through the chair, so electoral gifts are dealt with differently than our other gifts received by officers and the CEO and elected members, for example. I'm not aware of, in my time here, that's 5.5 years, of any electoral gift having been received. I will check the website. It probably could be clearer that we do have a role, and that role is empty at this point in time.
Great. Okay, just as a follow-up, I checked last night, so it does have a section about your process, but it doesn't have a link. So maybe just being clear, especially if we're noting it down on here as that it's located on the website.
No, I checked 2023 and 24 one. It's not through the link, but through just typing in manually and then clicking it.
Yeah, I double checked that way as well, because I checked something else and I found it that way. So it's a good point. Second point was just on page 60. Maybe the next one, sorry. Just on the top one again, was the CEO and senior employees vacancy advertised in accordance. It says there's no recruitment activity for the CEO or any other designated senior employees, but there was a recruitment of the Director of City Development and Sustainability in December. So I presume that would be a designated senior employee role. So I just want to check whether that's included.
Through the chair, no. The only designated role we have at the city is the CEO. There's a policy around that states that.
Okay. I think maybe just in clarity in terms of comments, because it says all other designated senior employees. So just being clear, this just relates to the CEO, perhaps.
Through the chair, I think that's commentary from the Local Government Act, because the local government can designate other senior people to be that position. So local governments that have a deputy CEO would be under that. So
okay, no problems. Cool. No further questions.
Just further to the discussion around independence of the CAR, I was curious as to whether the city has considered having an independent review of the CAR on, say, a 3-yearly basis, just to provide that level of independence.
Certainly something the city could consider. This is the city giving assurance to the Department of Local Government, rather than assuring ourselves. But as you know, as an exercise to make crystal clear that we are 100% confident we are giving the correct answers, that's certainly something we can consider.
If there are no further questions, could we move to the recommendation, please? I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation from the chair. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor, all those in favour? Nil against, the motion's carried. The Council Policy Review. I suggest we take this paper as read. I note that we've got quite a lot of work to do in this area. If I may, the first question that I would like to raise is we have a number of commitments around the first half of 2025. Is that realistic with respect to the amount of policies to be reviewed?
Through the chair, a review of the policy might simply be ensuring that it's accurate, up to date, and it meets the city's needs. So it might be that we've reviewed the policy, no changes are needed. Council are endorsing our recommendation to implement that policy. So the time frame for the review of all policies is based on reviewing them all before the end of this financial year, and we've developed this time frame based on our discussions with the teams. So this is very much our hope that they will review them in that time frame.
Thank you. Any further questions? Ben?
Thank you. Through the chair, it's great having a prioritised plan. I know it's been a bit discussion for a while. I guess there's a lot of opportunities to rationalise, consolidate, the number of sort of policies to make it sort of more clear. So, given that there's an active focus on that, is excellent. I suppose just sort of noting in terms of target dates, once it gets past July this year, it starts to get quite big in terms of timeframes. We've given ourselves sort of a year for completion. So I guess the question is there anticipation of once we complete the first round of policies that will start to be a bit more firm in terms of the dates and making sure that we allocate appropriate resources, etc.
Through the chair, yeah, absolutely. And we've in the last few months we've added all the policies to the Attain compliance calendar. So policy owners receive regular updates when their policy is going to be coming up for review and when it's overdue for review. So the hope is once we get these policies up to scratch, that relevant teams do the hard work to make sure these policies remain current and reviewed within stated timeframes and meet the city's needs.
Thank you. No further questions.
If there are no further questions, we have an officer recommendation. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Mayor. Seconded? Thank you, Councillor. All those in favour? Nil against. The motion's carried. The risk management report. Thank you. Over to management for an introduction, please.
Through the chair, just briefly, there's only two changes to the strategic risks. Two of the risks have had their title wording changes to more accurately reflect the actual risk to the city, SR12 and SR18, which are on the screen at this point. There's no high or extreme rated operational risks been entered into the system since the committee's December meeting. Risk West, unfortunately, flat out. We haven't been able to get them to come to the city to do their planned further risk training with key staff, but I'm assured that they will before the end of well, we're looking at April at this stage, given their limited availability. So they'll be coming in, providing further key staff, so that's directors and managers, with further risk training. And they've reviewed our risk register. They've already made a number of recommendations. We found that training that they previously provided very beneficial, so we're looking forward to having them come and provide further training as soon as they can fit us in.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Through the chair, thanks very much for the context and the risk management report. I think, as we've referenced in all the preceding sessions, I think the reporting is fit for purpose, and it shows that it's sort of utilised as part of decision making, and particularly good to see that you updating the risk information rather than being a static document. So that's excellent. I had just a query, probably a process query more than anything else, but just on page 89, which is SR25. Just had a query. It says it's out of appetite in the bottom left-hand corner of that page. However, the risk is yellow residual, which we say is within appetite, part of the framework. So I just want to understand why that's saying it's out of appetite.
Through the chair, I'll have to probably approach Cam's risk about that. I know it's determined based on back-end calculations, which are more sophisticated than I can wrap my head around. It's probably on the basis that legislative non-compliance is viewed as more of a risk to the city than perhaps some other risk types, but I'll have to investigate why this is out of appetite. On the faces of it, it doesn't appear to be out of appetite. And just to comment on this particular risk, the city is aware of some changes coming in this area. We're taking steps to make sure that we are compliant, and I wouldn't rate this as one of the more severe risks that exist for the city in the coming period.
Thank you. As a follow-up, just if you're having that discussion, the next page, SR 28, has a sort of similar, both residual and target is the same, but it's saying it's out of appetite. So it's just double checking that in terms of those sort of calculations, it's saying the same thing and aligned to the risk management framework. Through the chair, just a sort of query. There's quite a large number of actions that have the end date in the past that still is noted as in progress rather than overdue. My question is, as part of your risk management process, do you regularly review those key risk actions which remain overdue, particularly for those high-rated risks?
Through the chair. So risks themselves have a review date, and individual actions also have a separate review date. So those can be two separate dates. So risk owners, so whoever's the responsible person for this individual risk, will receive reminders for both of them. My team will also provide training and meet with teams to make sure their risks are up to date. In this instance, it looks like that particular action that remains ongoing. So this 3 completed actions is one that remains ongoing. That end date is marked as 1st of January 2025, so it probably needs an update.
Great. Through the chair, I think the reference to the overdue action was the risk before, which is due in December. I think it's 10% complete. But I guess I'm more interested not for a specific example, but from the process, because for me, if I was a sort of risk owner or part of the governance activity, highlighting that action is overdue, providing those reports and prompts to the risk and control owners would probably be a sort of key process, just to make sure that they're updating those as part of your regular review.
That's a good point, thank you. Any further questions? If not, could we move to the recommendation, please? I'm happy to move from the chair. Could I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor. All those in favour? Nil against. The motion's carried. The Work Health and Safety Statistical Report 8.5. Take this as read. Are there any particular comments or questions, please?
Thank you, and thanks for the report and the commentary as part of the report. I think it provides useful colour. Note that there was a LTI or lost time injury and a medical treatment within the reporting period. Can you just maybe give a summary of the nature of the incidents and what the remedial actions are?
Yes. Through your chair, lost time injury report of 2. A employee who was working outside of a building in the garden space walked past an air conditioner which was attached to the wall and hit their head. So there was a concussion. He had some headaches, continued working for a couple of days, and then the headaches continued, and went to the doctor and said it was possibly concussion. The other incident was at the Aquatic Centre, where one of our instructors slipped on a wet tile and fell and hit their back. They are back at work at this point, but it was a lost time injury.
Okay, thank you. Just one follow-up question. Was investigations sort of completed as part of those, and are those sort of complete with any structural issues, I suppose?
Yes, the investigations have been completed with both of the incidents, with some corrective actions around, I think for the Aquatic it was something around suitable footwear or something of that nature.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Just a general question. So I'm looking on page 99. In this instance, we have a number of pie graphs, for example, incidents by directorate. Is it possible in the system to have that turned into a bar graph so we can identify any trends over time, year by year?
Yes, that is possible. And in fact, we've just had that request in the Work Health and Safety Committee, and we're starting to translate those in from pie graphs into bar graphs, so we can look at doing that for sure.
Any further questions? If not, we'll move to the recommendation. Could I have someone move the recommendation, please? Thank you, Mayor. Seconded, Deputy Mayor? Thank you. All those in favour? Nil against? Motion's carried. Do we have any late or urgent items of business? No. No answers to questions which were to be taken on notice. So if there is no further business, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and close the meeting. Thank you.